The Giving Done Right podcast is brought to you by the Walton Family Foundation. Everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed, no matter where you live, what you look like, or how modest your beginnings. But how do we create access to opportunity so that people have a chance to reach their full potential? The Walton Family Foundation believes in the power of opportunity to transform lives, build strong communities, and protect a natural world that sustains us all. For more than 30 years, the Walton Family Foundation has been inspired by those who never see a challenge without striving to overcome it. Those whose inventions are driven by necessity. The dreamers, the doers. Those who are closest to the problem, because they are often closest to the solution. Opportunity thrives in healthy environments. It withers in ailing ones. Opportunity should never be limited by geography. No one ever solved a big problem by thinking small. And it is never easy overcoming tough challenges. It takes time and steady resolve. One thing is true. Everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed. Learn more at waltonfamilyfoundation.org.
When I give back, I don't know if I'm helping them more than they're helping me. Like, everyone thinks it's a one-way street, especially when you have the wealth and the power and the experience and whatever, like when you have the power dynamic. But a lot of people think it's a one-way street. That's not true.
Welcome to Giving Done Right, a podcast on everything you need to know to make an impact with your charitable giving. I'm Grace Nicolette.
And I'm Phil Buchanan.
Phil, am I allowed to have a favorite podcast guest?
I don't see why not.
Well, I certainly love our other guests, but today's two guests mean a great deal to me personally. We have Jeremy Lin, the very talented professional basketball player. He was the first Asian American signed to the NBA. And we have his sister-in-law, Patricia Sun, who manages his philanthropic and business efforts as the CEO of JLin Marketing. Now, I remember Linsanity. I don't know if you all do, that stretch
Absolutely.
of time when he seemed to defy all laws of basketball when he was on the Knicks. And I think that since that time, I've just followed him. And it's not even because I'm a basketball fan, but it's because of who Jeremy is and his story. I relate to him as someone who has a very similar family background and an Asian American that we can all look up to in the media where representation sometimes is really lacking.
And his story is incredible because he was undrafted. He was sitting on the bench, and then he gets called up and takes advantage of the opportunity and then some. And maybe that's why, apparently, for some period of time, he was literally the most popular person in the world in like public opinion polls. But all of that doesn't really explain why we'd have him on the Giving Done Right podcast, right? We've really been admiring Patricia and Jeremy's approach to his charitable giving and the way that he's talked about taking advantage of the opportunity he's been presented with to do good.
Yeah, he's super grounded. And we spoke to them from the family home in California. And you can hear the kids running around in the background and perhaps even the birds in the wind. And this is such a deep conversation. So I am so excited for you all to hear it.
Yeah, I loved it too. It's really interesting, fun, thoughtful, downright Linsane. Welcome, Jeremy. Welcome, Patricia. We are so happy to have you on the Giving Done Right podcast. And Jeremy, I think for Grace and me, one of the things that was really interesting is to hear you talk in speeches and interviews about not just the basketball part of the journey, but the realization of the platform that you had, the opportunity to have influence, and also recognition of what really mattered to you in life, maybe beyond winning the starting job or winning a championship. So can you just talk a little bit to us about that recognition that you had the opportunity to do something that went beyond basketball?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was an evolution in terms of how I approached it. I remember really vividly when I was in middle school or so, and I went to go pick up my friend, Stephen Brown. We had a big game. And so after I picked him up, I was like, hey, man, are you ready? Did you sleep well? We got a big game. And he was like, no, actually, I didn't. In the middle of the night, there were gunshots and there was a gunfight on my street. And right then and there, I realized that not everything is equal. Not everybody grows up the same. We're literally 5 minutes away from each other. He's just across the freeway. And what he is dealing with in his community is so, so different than what is happening in mine. And so as that seed was planted, I always knew if I had the right opportunity at the right time, I would want to give back, but I didn't fully know what that meant. Early on into my NBA career, all I wanted to do was establish myself and be recognized as a great basketball player. And for me, everything I did was about my career, but that seed was still planted of wanting to give back. I had to go through an evolution process of learning and realizing that no success and no failure in my career is going to be the end all be all. Like life goes on, even through anything that you could experience in your career. All the amazing successes like Linsanity, like being the most popular person on the entire planet. Even in the midst of that, I realized, I would just set a new goal. There's always something more to chase after, something more to do. And I realized that if I'm not bringing other people up with me, and if I'm not serving people along the way in my career, no success or failure will really give me the satisfaction and fulfillment that I want. So that's when I started to really look at myself and say, how can I go about my life to continue to radically love and serve other people and to give back to my community?
Part of that, it seems, from I've read about you, is a recognition that you could share some of your own struggles and challenges as a way of offering inspiration for others. So you've talked very openly, for example, about anxiety and mental health and your own experiences. And that's influenced your philanthropic giving, of course, but it has also had power in its own right as an example to others that, hey, we can talk about these issues. Or similarly, in 2020, as we saw a rise in violence against Asian American Pacific Islanders, you realized, well, I'm in a unique position to speak out here. And I feel like there's a possibility people listening will say, okay, yeah, so what? I mean, he's an NBA star, but we really all, at various points, have moments where we have a platform to have influence, and we either choose to take it or we shy away from it. But it seems like you've chosen to take it, even if that means making yourself a little bit vulnerable. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
There's a few principles that I firmly believe in. One, I think that athletes are elevated to this godlike status, or celebrities are elevated to this godlike status. And that's somewhat uncomfortable for me because we're all one and the same in terms of humanity. We have the same problems with the same struggles, the same temptations. At the end of the day, what I do, what I'm elite at, what I'm great at is a game of basketball, which people happen to love. There may be somebody right next to me, my neighbor right next to me might be elite, world class at something, but it might just not be valued the same by the world. And so that's one thing that I've realized is, okay, no matter how high somebody or the world may lift me up, I still have the exact same struggles as a human that any other human will have. And then the second thing about it, which ties back into giving back and philanthropy, it's selfish to kind of say, but when I give back, I don't know if I'm helping them more than they're helping me. Everyone thinks it's a one-way street, especially when you have the wealth and the power and the experience and whatever, when you have the power dynamic. But a lot of people think it's a one-way street. That's not true. I might learn more from the kids than the kids could learn from me. And so when you're asking me this question, the reason why I talk about those two things is we're getting to the point where I'm just like you guys. And if I try to play to this facade that I have it all together, that I'm this amazing human who just goes out and dominates on the court and everything off the court is easy. I have no mental issues. I have no confidence issues. I don't, that would be really inauthentic. And if I continue to go down that path, it would kill me from the inside out. And so one of the best things that I could do is put people around me that challenge me. And Patricia's one of those who and my mom and other people in my family, they don't let me get away with stuff. And so when they know that I'm being inauthentic, when they know that there are certain things that I probably should share that I'm a little bit too embarrassed to share, or when I'm going through something and I'm just messing up, they call me out and they teach me and they challenge me. And that's part of going through life together. And so why not share it with the world if it can help other people? That is a form of giving back, right?
That's awesome. Well, I wanted to ask, maybe, Patricia, I'll pose this question to you. You handle Jeremy's public affairs outside of basketball. How did you all decide where Jeremy would show up and endorse a cause or a nonprofit? Because it strikes me that there's a lot of people, probably approaching you to ask for Jeremy's help in endorsing lots of very valid causes, and you only have a certain amount of time and you want to steward it well. How did you think about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we try to do with Jeremy is, well, first and foremost, like be authentic to things that he cares about. And so there were causes early on that, and he'll say this himself, when it came to Asian American issues early on, he didn't feel that was authentic to him because that wasn't what was most on his heart. And then as he learned more about the Asian American experience and how race kind of plays into inequalities in our country, I think that passion sort of grew in him. But it was very important early on to not put him in positions where he's advocating for something that he doesn't really feel educated on yet. I think the other thing is like really trying to figure out where is our unique lane. And right now with all the Asian American issues going on or the race issues, there's a lot of places where I think we're tempted to go a lot of different ways, but really figuring out with his platform, with his voice, where he uniquely stands as a professional basketball player, what can he add to the conversation that other people can't? And trying to build collaboratively with other people that are working in this space instead of trying to be the voice or trying to reinvent the wheel.
That seems so wise. Did you have that perspective from the beginning? Because it seems like there are certain causes perhaps that you could pursue that would actually have more cachet, but you stuck to Jeremy's values, his interests. Say more about that, because I imagine that there are donors, again, like Phil said, can be stewarding their own platforms, but are really struggling with like, well, I care about this, but then this one might have better PR for me in some ways or better for my business. Say more about that decision.
Yeah. I think Jeremy from a young age knew that he cared a lot about the next generation. So that was a good place for us to start. And a lot of it was prototyping or trying things and figuring out like, hey, this doesn't resonate. And that's okay. Doing things like piece by piece and trying to figure it out. And I think both of us would say we spent a lot of time in spaces that we felt like wasn't the right place for us to be. I think it's a journey and I don't think anyone is going to figure it out right away. And we still struggle with doing things because it's hard to say no, or there's so many good things and we stretch ourselves too thin sometimes. But I think we try to leave some freedom. We try to figure out our focus and what we know we really want to go towards. But we also leave some freedom for things that might become interesting or that might be meaningful in his life or just from the things that he encounters, and leave space for changes in him as well.
This past year, there has been such a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes. And I'm wondering, how has this time changed or affected the way that you think about your philanthropy, Jeremy? So that's for either of you.
I would say okay, let's start with COVID. Our foundation was going through like a restructuring. And so we hired an ED, Stephanie Shu, who took us through 18 months of research and things like that. And during these 18 months, we really just focused in on Asian American youth in the Bay Area. And as we were in the middle of that process, COVID started to really break out in the US. And then we went into Stop Asian Hate and a lot of the violence that the Asian American community was experiencing. So we were already on that path, but then it kind of just changed a little bit. Like with COVID and with the K curve, like we're starting to see the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and this disparity grow in a lot of different ways. And certain things are taking big hits, like education and access to education. Some of the grantees that we're working with our foundation, some of them are literally doing everything from like simple stuff. Like one of our grantees was just like, wow, the fact that we have a new refrigerator is such a game changer for being able to provide food for these kids. And then there's other things like education, resources. How do we get them to be able to continue to pursue education or be able to stay so that they don't get too far behind? And then we started talking to other people and they're like, a congresswoman from New York was like, the biggest thing that the kids need is confidence because of what has happened with the Asian American violence. And then another grantee was like, the biggest thing that we need, mental health, because what we're realizing is in 2021, 80% of Asian American youth have been bullied, and that they said that there's more mental health issues from the Stop Asian Hate and the violence that the Asian American community has seen than the pandemic itself. So now we're seeing new issues and maybe these aren't issues that are we're completely not there, but they're being exacerbated and heightened right now. And that's influencing how we interact with the grantees that Patricia and Steph led us down this path of choosing.
I feel like you are such an inspirational figure to the Asian American community. And, I count myself as someone who doesn't follow NBA basketball at all. But since Linsanity, the only time I read ESPN is when there are articles about you in it and have followed your career. And I feel like that kind of representation, it really matters. And so I'm wondering, where does your philanthropic spirit come from? Who inspires you?
From a young age, it was my mom and my dad. My mom is the best example. Anything that she could save, she'll save when it comes to her and when it comes to us. Like, we go out to a restaurant, like growing up, we never could order anything but tap water. Like, wouldn't even think about a bottle of water or a fountain soda. But then if she saw somebody in need, whatever they needed, it'd be like, boom, we'll give that to you. I'm like, what? Did you just give that to Auntie so-and-so? Do you know how many fountain sodas that was? And it's just like everything that we were always taught, like, okay, we can be economical about certain things. This concept of dollar for dollar, penny for penny, you can't approach everything in life with math and logic. I think that came from her deep heart of compassion and empathy. And my dad always told us, like, from a young age, the only thing I ever had was 5 marbles. That's all I ever grew up with. And my only choice was to play with these marbles, study, or go help out on the farm. And so they always instilled in us like this concept of like everything that we get, we're trying to take care of other people along the way.
That's awesome. I can really relate to that. My family's from Taiwan as well, and we were also not allowed to order anything but tap water at restaurants. And yeah, I mean, my mom, she didn't have her first apple until she was in college because of the poverty. And it really does shape us, right? Like the way that we think about resources. And that's really powerful. Can you talk a little bit about the influence of your faith? I mean, that's something that you're really public about. And I know the Christian faith has a lot to say about giving and generosity. How is that factored into the way you think about giving?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, I used to think everything was different buckets. I had basketball, family, education, faith. And then I started to realize, like, actually, sometimes I don't want to talk about it, but it's like I can't help it because I'm starting to realize that faith is more the umbrella.
Yeah.
Or it's like the lens with which I see the world. Just like, as an immigrant, you can't see the world through any lens other than your own experiences, your own upbringing, what you've been through. And I think like that's really important for me in terms of my faith, realizing the most basic principles of faith or Christianity is one, love God, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. But the other one, when it comes back to specifically giving back, is love others as you would want to be loved yourself. That's a very simple concept. It doesn't say like love others a half of how you would love yourself or a quarter of how you like. It's just love others as you would want to be loved. And so when we go about everything, when we think about the grantees that we're working with, it's like, what happens if I was that kid right there, in that school? Or what happens if that was my future son or daughter who was in that position? How would I love that person? How would I want to be loved myself? Am I willing to go and do that for somebody else? And why philanthropy is so important, and I'm grateful to God to give me the career path that he's given me, is that I have literally seen the absolute highest of like, keep saying this, like I was literally the most popular, most famous, most whatever person on the planet. There's nobody above me.
That's right. Yeah.
And then I've gone to really deep lows as well in my mind where it's like, wow, it feels like from a career standpoint, I have nothing. Like I'm back out of the league. Right now I'm not in the NBA. Last year I couldn't get a job in the NBA. I've experienced not being able to play in the NBA at all to having the peak of the NBA and everything in between. And through that all, I've just realized if we're not loving other people as we would want to be loved ourselves, like, man, like it's all cool, but like, it's kind of like meaningless. And that's a hard thing to say, but it's true for me. It's like, man, every time I get somewhere, when I finally made it to Harvard, did my life just end? And I was just like, okay, it's perfect. I'm good now. I don't need anything else. No, now it's like, oh, I need a great freshman year. Then I have a great freshman year and it's like, I need a great sophomore. And then it's like, okay, now I need a good job. Then you get a good job and you're like, what do I need to perform well. And then I need that promotion. And it just, if I'm not careful, it never ends. And so during that whole time, I've started to realize if I love God and I love other people, that gives me the most fulfilling, purposeful, joyful life where I'm not riding up and down with the circumstances of life.
Wow, that is really powerful.
Can we stick a little bit on this topic of the moment and what's happening in this country with respect to Asian Americans?
Yeah.
Says the one white guy in the conversation, which is because we're definitely not doing a great job in a lot of respects as a country with folks loving others like they would want to be loved. We've seen so much hate, so much division, and obviously there is a unique and horrific legacy of racism against Black people dating to slavery, Native and Indigenous people, and the genocide carried out against those Indigenous populations. And then sometimes lost in the conversation are others, including Latinos and Asian American Pacific Islanders, whose story may be different and who have faced various kinds of systemic and individual racism. And what we see in philanthropy is not necessarily a lot of focus on that issue. And Grace, you wrote very powerfully about this in February on our blog. And I wonder if we could talk about this, like, how do we help folks figure out in philanthropy that we need to talk about the diversity of the Asian American experience? Jeremy, I've heard you talk a lot about the model minority myth, and Grace, you as well, in some of your writings. How do we sustain the attention in this moment and get other donors focused on this, not just Asian American donors, but donors who care about this country being the inclusive, multi-ethnic country that we want it to be?
Yeah, I think for us, that is definitely a question that we wrestle with, which is from March to May, this was kind of the topic. The topic moves and the topic keeps shifting, but how do you do change or giving in a way that's disciplined and focused on long-term change?
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of amazing work that's done in victim relief and in attending to some of the issues that are happening in the moment, and that's all necessary. But when we think about long-term, like what is actually going to move the needle on some of these race issues, I think that's where we want to be in our philanthropy. And for us, like that is youth and youth development, empowering this next generation, but also empowering the leaders of color that are leading these foundations and helping them to continue to attend to the needs of these communities, not just when tragedy strikes, but in the long term when down the road, there's mental health issues because of these tragedies. Who is still going to be there? Who's still going to sustain that work? I think that's, for us, like that's the philanthropy that we want to be in.
There's often this sense, which is false, that it's a zero-sum game, right? Like we need to focus on anti-Black racism, rightly so. But then there are voices that say, well, then if you're focusing on Asian and Pacific Islander issues, that means that you're necessarily taking away resources or attention to other causes. I don't see it as zero sum. And so I'm curious what you would say to donors who are saying, yeah, but there's this issue here with the Black community or, that kind of thing. And I know that it's part of a pattern of us being overlooked often, but how have you navigated that?
If I could say two things, it'd be one, listen. You have to start from a place of listening. And then two, you have to make it personal. Like I had to first listen to somebody saying like East Palo Alto has the highest crime per capita of any city in the US. And it's like, okay, the fact that I even listened to that or heard that and registered, that's the first step. The next thing is like, oh, it became personal because I knew somebody who went through that. I was oblivious. I had no idea. And because I learned or I listened or I read, I gained some information. And then because I had a relationship, like it became personal. And now it really sticks. And that's the momentum that I'm saying, like, right now, it is not a zero-sum game. Like, I don't see it at all like that. But I think that there will be no long-term momentum unless people are listening and then making it somewhat personal for them. I could sit here and say stats like, okay, 0.2% of all philanthropic funding goes towards AAPI stuff. 0.2, which is like very, very little. And we can talk about a whole bunch of other stats. And that's the listening side of it. But then there's also the conversation and the personal side of getting to know somebody. And once you care about those people, then you start to see yourself in those people or your own children in those people. And then that's when you're like, I really need to go and make a change and to definitely understand that like the systemic multi-generational issues, one of those is the thought process that like it is a zero-sum game and that we have to compete over who gets to get what. And so that 0.2%, if I see that 0.2% as like, okay, we have $100, 0.2% goes towards AAPI stuff. I'm not saying, okay, let's steal somebody else's so that we can get our 0.2 to like 5%. I'm saying we need to make that 100%. Like if it was $100, we need to make that $200 or we need to increase that bucket and we need to spread more to everybody.
Yeah. And I would say that's something we struggle with when Jeremy speaks out on these issues. I think because he's so visible as an Asian American athlete, I think people tend to think, okay, well, he's the Asian American guy. He cares about the Asian American issues. But there's actually a lot of talking about the anti-Black issues and addressing that we actually really care about as well. It just isn't going to be as picked up. But we kind of see it as the two are like fundamentally entwined. When people of color, when different communities are lifted up, it will only lift up other communities as well. And so much of where Asian Americans are at in the country right now is because of work that the Black community has done in their fight for justice. And I think we see that with our grantees as well. These kids aren't living in isolated communities like Asian kids live here, Black kids live here. They all live together. And to really address the needs of one community, like you kind of have to address cross-racial issues and these kids living together and how they relate to each other. I think that for us, it's really about finding our lane, but also figuring out like how we can contribute to justice for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it is so important, I think, what you just said, Patricia. And I feel like one of the great challenges is to combat that fiction about the zero sum, which is really meant to divide. I think it is meant to weaken the potential alliances of people whose fortunes are, as you said, intertwined. That is essentially what Martin Luther King Jr. was trying to do in the last 3 years of his life with the Poor People's Campaign, was to help folks recognize that their fates were connected. I guess I'm curious for both of you, if you were to give advice to others who are early, and I'm not talking about other NBA stars necessarily, although it could be, folks who are just beginning the process of realizing, I have resources, I have a platform, I have an opportunity here to do something bigger and more meaningful than whatever goal it was I thought I was striving for, which I now have reached or partly reached or whatever. If you were to advise them on things you wish you'd been told or mistakes that you made that you don't want others to make, anything come to mind for either of you?
For me, I would say that giving is most meaningful and powerful done in community. So I think that for us, when we started out, there is something very isolating about trying to figure it out for yourself. Like, what do I care about? Where do I want to give? But there's a lot of people that have made the mistakes before us that we should learn from instead of trying to do everything ourselves in giving. And there's a lot of people that are very like-minded and that are very motivated and excited to give. And I think having dialogue with people that care about the issues that you care about, that have gone before you and tried things out, I think it just makes giving more robust and meaningful when you do it with people that also care about it as well. And there are a lot of people out there that are like that.
And you can avoid the constant reinvention of the wheel that we see where some donor says, oh, I've got a new idea. It's this. And Grace and I will look at each other like, that is so not new. We can introduce you to 100 people who thought that, and you should talk to them because it didn't actually work out so well. Anyway, Jeremy, what about you?
Mine would be know and check yourself. And what I mean by that is know yourself. What do you want and what are you signing up for? And I think for many years of my career, I said I wanted to do philanthropy, but I was only willing to go so far. And I hid behind a facade that like if I cut a couple checks, that was philanthropy. And then the people around me, including Patricia, started to challenge me like, you say you want to help people. I don't see it. Am I going out and learning this stuff, talking to these people, having these conversations? Am I getting on the ground, listening to what is going on in the communities? Or am I just cutting checks behind a desk or just at home? And so know yourself in a sense of how deep do you want to go? Because if all you want to do is cut checks, there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally okay. And there's a role for people like that. But for me, I was overstating what I was actually willing to put in. Mm-hmm. And I had to really know myself and realize like, I need to stop. It's like buying a dog, but not being ready to actually care for the dog. Who ends up getting hurt? The dog. Like, because you're not ready to like provide for what you said you were willing to do. And so I started to realize a lot of that hypocrisy in myself. And then I think the second thing is check yourself. So that's know yourself. Second one is check yourself. I started off my philanthropy being like, okay, I'm going to come up with a bunch of good ideas of how I can come in and interject and help. And checking myself means putting my ego at the door and realizing that one, I'm not smarter than these people. Two, there's people that are doing this. They've literally devoted their lives, their entire career to that. So how can I come in and after an hour figure out what they need? No, like my job is to come in and basically play a support role and say like, what is going on with your community? Do you even need help from me? And if so, how can I help? And realizing that when I come in to help again, it's not a one-way street. I'm not better than these other people. I don't have it all figured out. We're all going through this path of life together. We need each other and we're going to learn and draw from each other. And that's kind of why like the concept of philanthropy or even the term itself, I kind of wish we could like change it a little bit because I just feel like that notion of I'm coming in, I'm going to help you. I don't know if I fully agree with that.
Because maybe donors, as you were saying earlier, they don't know the ways that they need the communities that they're trying to help. That riches or wealth maybe is financial is only one aspect, right? But maybe the donor is missing the wealth of these communities that isn't financial. So we finish every episode by asking our guests a question, and I wanted both of you to answer today. Giving done right to you is about fill in the blank. Patricia, let's start with you.
Giving done right is being proximate to the people that you're giving to. And so erasing that power dynamic of I'm giving to you and walking alongside together to make change. I think that would be giving done right.
That's great.
Anything to add to that, Jeremy?
For me, giving done right is radical love for others and something different that I would love to see in the next generation. When we give, how can we really do it in a way that's different than status quo? Because I think what we're seeing, what we're realizing, especially in the US, is like status quo is kind of what has gotten us to the position that we're in right now, which I don't think anybody is very happy about. So I would say like there has to be a change.
We want to thank both of you for spending this time with us. Such a great conversation. And obviously you have made a lot of people happy watching the way you play the game of basketball, but it's equally exciting to see the way you're playing the game of giving back. And Patricia, obviously, you're such a key partner and ally in that effort, and a lot of wisdom in your counsel for others, including some who've been maybe doing a lot longer, but haven't reached some of the insights that I think you two have.
Thank you so much to you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for all that you guys are doing as well in this space. It's really inspired a lot of what we do.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
So Grace, it's no secret to me or any of your coworkers that you're a huge Jeremy Lin fan. And then we got to have him on the podcast. So what'd you think?
I thought it was great. I am so struck by his wisdom and how the trials and tribulations he's faced, being in the NBA, not being in the NBA, racial discrimination, mental health, all of this, he is sharing with others, and it's actually given him a tremendous amount of wisdom in a lot of areas, but especially in his philanthropy.
Yeah. To me, there's like two elements. There's the recognition, at a pretty young age, right? That life is not just about getting to the NBA or getting to whatever career goal that people set for themselves. That there's deeper meaning that you got to pursue and that you got to be aware of all along the journey. And then secondly, to your point about philanthropy, the wisdom to understand that the answers lie in communities, not with the donor.
Yes. And also, the other thing about giving in community is the fact that he has Patricia, he has his mom, people around him who are grounding him. I mean, we spoke to them from the family home in California, and he was just so down to earth. You can tell his fame did not get to his head, and you can see that in his philanthropy too.
Yeah, and I think whatever we do in our lives, whether we're in a leadership role, whether we're a big donor or just a regular donor, the recognition that we are better as people when we create opportunities to be challenged by other people, to hear the hard truths about ourselves. I mean, he talked about becoming better by listening to the feedback of others, by welcoming in that kind of critique. There's a lesson there, obviously, that, like I said, goes way beyond just being a good giver. It's about being a good person.
I'm so grateful we had this conversation, not just because I'm a fan of him, but I do think that his philanthropy has a lot of great things to emulate for donors who want to be effective. So, Phil, where can people go for more information about effective giving?
More resources about effective giving live on CEP.org. And of course, givingdoneright.org is the podcast website. It has all the episodes from both seasons as well as show notes.
You can find us on Twitter at Grace Nicolette and at Phil X Buchanan. You can also send us a note with any suggestions or comments at gdrpodcast@cep.org.
I want to thank our sponsors, as always, the Walton Family Foundation and the National Philanthropic Trust. And if you like the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps.
Super thanks again to Jeremy Lin and Patricia Sun for joining us from your number one fan. Giving Done Right is a production of the Center for Effective Philanthropy. It's hosted by me, Grace Nicolette, and Phil Buchanan. It's produced by Sarah Martin, with mixing and engineering by Kevin O'Connell, and additional editing by Isabel Hibbert. Our theme song is from Blue Dot Sessions, and original podcast artwork is by Jay Kuska. A special thanks to our colleagues Molly Heidemann and Say Darling for their research and logistical support.